You might wonder, what does God look like or feel like? And there's some good things we can say about this. God feels like awakening from a dream. That's a very good description of it, which is why we call it awakening or enlightenment. I remember when I had one of my deepest awakenings. It was so shocking and startling that I just sat there with my mouth agape in my room, just like stunned like this. And I was just like kind of like babbling to myself. And I was just babbling one word: awakening, awakening, awakening. I'm awake. I'm awake. I'm awake. Like I'm awake for the first time in my life. I'm awake. It's just like waking up from a dream. So imagine that everything that's happening right now, including me sitting here talking to you, you sitting there trying to figure this stuff out for yourself, all of this is just a dream. And that when you discover God, you can realize that all your entire biographical life, from the moment you were born up till right now, has all just been a figment of one's imagination within consciousness. This very moment that's happening right now is God imagining this moment, because what God is God is a universal mind. That means that physical wall behind you, the floor you're sitting on, the entire earth, all the physical stuff that you thought was there the whole time, that was objective and real, that grounded your reality, all of that is just a figment of your imagination. And now, that does not mean that you have the power to think the floor out of existence. You have to understand that when I talk about the figment of the imagination of God, we're talking about a much more robust concept than what we traditionally think of as imagination. Conventionally, we think of imagination as just like, oh yeah, we're just thinking stuff up in the human mind, in the human brain, images and thoughts. Of course, that is imagination, but you're also ignoring that imagination is a much broader thing which actually encompasses all of reality. This very moment is being imagined. It's not a physical thing that exists anywhere. It's being imagined by God. And what is God? Nothing. So this very moment is nothing. It's not that God has a brain. God doesn't look like a human with a skull and a brain inside of it that has consciousness in it according to the materialist paradigm. That's not how it works. The way it works is that this very moment is an imagination within the mind of God, but this very moment is also identical with the mind of God. So another way you can think of it is that wall, that floor, my face, the voice coming out, think of this as, this is the brain of God. This is the machinery of God. The physical machinery of God, so to speak, putting it into the materialist frame, is identical with the consciousness or the mind. The brain and the mind are actually one thing. And how does God's brain or mind look like? Precisely this very moment. Look, this is God right here. This is God's mind. This is God's brain. Can you see it? What else does God feel like? It feels like dying. It feels like the end of life as you know it. And this is why God is so difficult for most people to pursue and to finally grasp, is because who wants to die? Do you want to face your death? As an atheist, you think you faced your death? No, you haven't. You don't know what death is. See, you spend your whole life avoiding death. And the funny thing is that collectively as a culture, what we have labeled death is actually God. We've literally named the realization of God death, and we hold it as the worst, most terrifying thing possible, and we try to avoid it at all costs. So our entire society and culture is built around the avoidance of death. We've demonized death, and we view death as the worst possible thing that could happen, when actually all that happens when you die is you become God. You realize God, you wake up. You get this? The only thing that's going to die is your idea of physical reality and your idea of you as a biological self. Nothing real is going to die. So in a sense, there's no such thing as death. Death is a concept that you've imagined. God cannot die because God is infinite, so God has no place to go. Where's God gonna go if he dies? He ain't got nowhere to go because he's already nowhere and nothing. See? So when you realize that, it will feel like death to you because you've been identified with being this biological creature your whole life, and you've thought that physical reality was real your whole life. So when that's taken away from you, it is like death, and you will be terrified by it. God also feels like a total surrender. Imagine if from this day on, you completely surrendered all control of your life. All of it. So you know that all that struggle you do every day, all the manipulation you do, all the scheming, all the hard work, all the effort that you put into life to trying to make things turn out the way you want. Imagine if you just said, fuck it, I'm surrendering everything. I'm not going to try anymore at all. I'm just going to all leave it up to God. I'm going to leave it up to the universe. Whatever the universe wants to do, I'll just do that. That would be taking your ego out of life, which is precisely the realization of God. And then imagine living your whole life under this constant state of total surrender, where you don't feel like you have separate control over the universe anymore. That's what God feels like. God also feels like the dissolution of all boundaries, because you enter this state, once you're fully awake, you enter this state of non-dual awareness, where all the dualistic categories of life versus death, man versus woman, good versus bad, all of them melt away, all of them merge into one. And that's what allows you to feel the oneness with the entire universe. God also feels like a mindfuck or an epiphany. It is the biggest mindfuck ever. You haven't experienced a mindfuck until you've glimpsed God or awoken. And you know, the word epiphany, colloquially, we just use that word as like someone who has an insight, an epiphany, an insight. But really, that's a word from the Christian tradition, from the Christian lexicon. And what it means, originally what it meant, was the realization of God. It's an epiphany. That's literally what it is. It also feels like the words wow and oh my God. OMG. Chances are when you realize God for the first time, the words out of your mouth will be wow, 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 or oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. It feels simultaneously awesome and terrifying. It's awesome because it's so big and infinite and so beautiful, and it's terrifying because it eclipses and threatens your little ego and your personal identity and your biological, biographical self. It also feels like exiting the Matrix. You know, the movie The Matrix, where Neo discovers that the Matrix is just a computer simulation, and then he breaks free of it, and then he looks out onto the quote-unquote real world outside the Matrix, and he's blown away by how grim and horrific it is out there and all of this. And so there's this stark difference between what's inside the Matrix and what's outside the Matrix. So finally, he's broken free. That's what it feels like. Except when you really wake up and you leave the matrix that we've called reality, the matrix within which we do science, when you leave that, what's outside the matrix? Nothing. See, that's where the movie The Matrix really faltered, is that in the movie, they exit the matrix, but the place they exit to is fundamentally like no different really than the place they left. Inside the Matrix, outside the Matrix. I mean, yeah, the content is different. There's robots outside the Matrix, and it's kind of dark and grim and dirty. But the laws of physics are the same, logic and rationality, and it's basically the same universe, inside and outside. But when you realize the Matrix that is real life and physical science and existence, you also realize that there's nothing outside of it, which is even more freaky than discovering that this is a computer simulation. It's more radical than that. And it simultaneously leaves you in the Matrix, but transforms the Matrix in a profound way. And also it feels like you can't tell the people in the Matrix that you've exited the Matrix because they won't understand you. All right, so Neo goes back in the Matrix and he does stuff, but most of the people in the Matrix, they don't know he has broken out of the Matrix.